What is up, guys? It's been a while since I've been on camera, so hopefully I haven't lost my touch. But yes, it is that time of year again to do my top 10 favorite movies of the year. And I emphasize the word favorite because at this point everything's subjective and it's impossible basically to come up with the top 10 best. Before we start, I will just say right now that this will not be the last video of the year like it usually is. I'll also be doing an end of decade mashup along with the top 20 favorite of the decade video, which will come out in the next few days. Like every year, I haven't seen every single film that I kind of wanted to see. The two big ones being 1917 and Little Women. These are the two films that I think if I had seen them would probably have been on the list because I just love the people who are working on them so much. There are a couple of others that I haven't seen: Jojo Rabbit, Portrait of a Lady on Fire, Hidden Life, Bombshell, you know, those awardsy ones that have weird release dates. So with that out of the way, let's just get into the honorable mentions, which are How to Train Your Dragon 3, The Nightingale, The Last Black Man in San Francisco, Triple Frontier, Midsummer, John Wick 3, Toy Story 4, Uncut Gems, Ad Astra, and The Farewell. So at number 10, we actually have two films kind of joined together. The first one being... One of the great things about Rocketman is that it's a very simple film, but also very complex at the same time. What I mean by simple is that it's an incredibly enjoyable film that I think anyone can enjoy. I think Dexter Fletcher's direction is absolutely terrific and he needs to be doing more films. I think Taron Egerton's performance is like top 5 of the year. The guy has truly knocked it out of the park. And what I mean by complex is that this film takes pretty much every kind of trope and convention of the musical biopic genre and turns them on their head, or does something interesting with it. And I would say without a doubt that this is by far the best musical biopic we've had in years. And I secretly wish that this and Bohemian Rhapsody had kind of swapped release dates, because if this had come out last year, I think it would be sweeping award season and Taron Egerton would probably have won Best Actor because it is that good in my opinion. Knives Out, very similar to Rocketman in the sense that it's a very accessible film that I think anyone and everyone can and hopefully will enjoy, but it's also a very clever and complicated mystery. And I will say that at some points the film can feel like it's a little bit too intelligent at times, but what helps it is the great ensemble cast, which really humanizes it and gives it that endearing quality. You know, you've got Daniel Craig and Chris Evans playing against type, but Ana de Armas in this movie, I mean... Wow. Wow. So Doctor Sleep hasn't really been a gigantic talking point in terms of films and horror films of this year, which I find to be a little bit ridiculous, especially considering it's a more than worthy sequel to, in my opinion, the greatest horror movie of all time, The Shining. I think Mike Flanagan does a terrific job kind of combining the Stephen King novel, which I haven't read but I hear is absolutely terrific, with the masterful Stanley Kubrick film, while also kind of bringing his own flavor, his own filmmaking style. And ultimately what I love most about Doctor Sleep is that this is a film that stands beautifully on its own. It's got its own new characters, it's got its own compelling story and a mystery. It's almost more of a thriller than a horror in some scenes, but it is scary when it needs to be, it's emotional when it needs to be, and it takes the original characters, especially Dan Torrance, in a very interesting direction. However, I will say that if you like The Shining, or if you've watched The Shining, watching Doctor Sleep after having just seen The Shining will kind of elevate your experience, I guess. I know a lot of people don't love the third act, but personally I think it's a beautiful homage to a classic film. So I think it's fair to say that when it comes to dialogue-driven acting scenes, Marriage Story probably has the best one of the year. I'm talking, of course, about the argument scene, which, amongst many, shows that Marriage Story is a film that works on pretty much every level. This is a beautifully directed film. The actors, especially Scarlett Johansson, Adam Driver, Laura Dern, and Ray Liotta, in my opinion, are all worthy of Oscar nominations, if not wins. The cinematography, the score, the editing, all absolutely top-notch. And Noah Baumbach's screenplay is so brutally but beautifully written at the same time. And in many ways, I would say he's kind of like the opposite to Aaron Sorkin, in the sense that Aaron Sorkin kind of writes dialogue that's very witty and sharp and clever, and very few people could actually kind of like come up with on the spot. Whereas Noah Baumbach's dialogue is much more kind of natural and realistic. And, you know, you have people talking over each other, you have people kind of pausing because they don't know what the right word to choose is in a conversation, you know, that kind of stuff. And it really works in the context of this film. I will say though that on an emotional level, I don't think I was hit quite as hard by Marriage Story as a lot of other people were. And perhaps that's because I'm a little bit too young, and I think maybe when I'm a bit older, I'll have a better appreciation for the film and the story and the themes. This movie is something. This movie is certainly something. One of the biggest compliments I can give to The Lighthouse is that, similar to how I would describe the process of filmmaking, it's like a nightmare that you don't want to wake up from. The movie is dark, both literally in the sense that, it's black and white shot in 4:3 beautifully, but also in terms of tone. Because the movie is dark and really messed up and really weird, but it's also quite funny. I would say that The Lighthouse is kind of like that one friend that we all have who's completely unfiltered and speaks their mind no matter what, even if they know it's probably going to get them killed. The Lighthouse is a film that knows exactly what it is, knows exactly what it wants to be, and does so with like zero remorse. And yet, we as the audience aren't always 100% sure of what's going on. It's an incredibly ambiguous film, and beautifully so. We are not always sure what the hell is going on, but we're along for the ride, and it's probably because of Robert Eggers' brilliant direction along with the powerhouse performances by Pattinson and Defoe.
If you just...
Now I know a lot of people have problems with this film, and it's been a big talking point obviously, but I absolutely love Joker. Not only because it's an absolutely beautifully shot, beautifully scored, beautifully cut, beautifully designed film, with probably my favorite performance of the year by Joaquin Phoenix, but what makes Joker so special, aside from being a brilliant film in my opinion, is what it represents. Because this film shows us that in some cases, great filmmaking, great storytelling speaks for itself. And that smaller films that are more character focused can in fact do well at the box office. And this is a great step forward, not only for superhero films, but films in general, because it shows that these kinds of films still have an audience and still have a market. Now, one of the criticisms of Joker is that the way that it depicts violence and the killing and all the terrible stuff that happens in the film, it shows it in a very kind of satisfying way, right? It's almost as if, oh, they deserved it. And a lot of people have taken issue with that. Now, I understand that completely, but in my opinion, those acts of violence perfectly complement the arc of the character, which is a very unique arc, because Joker is not a movie about someone turning from good to bad or bad to good. It is a movie about someone who has been affected by the society around him, and as a result of that has kind of morphed into the most full-fledged or the ultimate version of himself, regardless of whether or not he does good or bad. And then because of that, he then is able to have an effect on the society around him. And that kind of arc I find to be incredibly interesting, very similar to something like Nightcrawler, for example. And coincidentally is also something I'm working on in a screenplay. So not only does Joker inspire me as an audience member, it's very inspirational to me as a filmmaker as well. When it comes to Scorsese films of this decade, Wolf of Wall Street is my favorite, Shutter Island is probably my least favorite, and then you've got Hugo, Silence, and The Irishman kind of in the middle. And I have absolutely no idea how to kind of rank them because they're so incredibly unique and so different from each other. And it just shows that Scorsese is one of those directors who can and pretty much has done almost everything and makes a masterpiece in pretty much every genre. And here he kind of goes back to what a lot of people say is what he does best, and turns pretty much every preconceived notion on their head. Because I mean, Steven Zaillian's screenplay is just subversive in all the best ways. It's one of the most well-shot films of the year. It's one of the most well-edited films of the year. The score and the song choices are next level. It has the best trio of performances I've seen in a long time. And on a thematic level, I think The Irishman is about two things. It's about age and mortality and regret and isolation, but also it's a story of friendship and loyalty. And that part of it really, really hit me hard just because of how universal it is. And so when I saw the decisions that Frank Sheeran makes, it was just heartbreaking. It was just heartbreaking. And also the movie probably has one of my favorite ending shots of the year. Now I'm sure a lot of you are probably thinking Ford v Ferrari is a little bit high on this list, but every year I always have one or two of these where, I love them so much more than everyone else. And how could you not like Ford v Ferrari? I mean, it is a beautifully made feel-good film, that's number one. You feel the intensity and the stakes of the mission that they're on. But more importantly, the reason I think it's so high on this list is because ultimately, in my opinion, Ford v Ferrari is a film about artistic integrity. The way Carroll Shelby and Ken Miles talk about racing and cars, they talk about it like an art form. and rightfully so. In the same way that I talk about films, there's like a genuine love there that I don't think can be faked. And to see the artists go up against the businessmen and sort of find a compromise, find a middle ground for them to both achieve success, I think it was an incredibly powerful and poignant message, and I love every minute of it. Now, as of right now, my number 2 and my number 3 are kind of joint, and I'm having a really hard time picking which one is my favorite. And I honestly think that number 3 is actually a better film than number 2, and that in about 20-30 years time, I'll prefer number 3. But as of right now, my number 3 film of 2019 is... So Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, aside from being a perfect love letter to both LA and Hollywood and the film industry, is almost like a fairy tale, which is, I mean, it's in the name, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And I say that because the way Tarantino has changed history and the way he depicts the time period and the location is so incredibly romantic, and you could feel his love for the town, you could feel his love for the industry so much, and you know, it just kind of bleeds out on every frame. And also I would say it's one of those films that has kind of bled into my actual life, because I listen to the Once Upon a Time in Hollywood soundtrack whenever I drive. If you haven't done that yet, you absolutely have to, because it's amazing. I only have one issue with the film, and that is that the first 2 acts and the third act feel like 2 separate masterpieces. The first 2 acts is very relaxed, it's very chilled, it's a great hangout movie where nothing much happens, but because you're really interested in the characters, you know, it gets you along for the ride. The third act is a much more traditional Tarantino film, with the violence, the build-up, the tension, the voiceover, and the separation of the two felt a little bit too jarring for me. But regardless, this is a film that is incredibly rewatchable, and I will be absolutely cherishing for years to come. Moving on to number 2. Like I said, I do think Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is a slightly better film, and I think that in the long run, I'll probably prefer it to Endgame. However, Endgame basically marks the culmination of my childhood, because I mean, it came out in my last year of high school. And you know, this first chunk of the MCU has really been life-changing for me, and for a lot of people. And of course, you know, one of the big arguments here is that would you actually enjoy Avengers Endgame as much if you hadn't seen the films leading up to it? No, of course not. But I have. And that's why I love it so much. This is a film that means a lot to me personally, you know. It's one of the best cinema-going experiences I've ever had, and certainly the best of the year. It's a damn near perfect conclusion to an incredible saga of films, some of which of course are not that good, but mostly really great films. And this film hit me on an emotional level unlike any other film did for me this year. And for that, I just cannot be more grateful for the Russo brothers for actually pulling it off, and for the entire cast and crew. Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, what else could it have been? Parasite is just, it's something else, you know. Usually, my favorite film of the year is sort of like an amalgamation of the other films on the list. But in this case, I think Parasite is just, the reason I love it is because it's so different and so unique from the others. I mean, I guess like The Lighthouse, it takes place in a very kind of small amount of locations. Like Knives Out, it has a rich family. Like Joker, it has people who get what they deserve, right? But the way that Bong Joon-ho goes about telling this story, I find to be simple when required and complicated when required, you know, because he's dealing with a lot of heavy themes, and he does so with immaculate level of craft. But what I think makes me love Parasite so much, and what I think ultimately makes it my favorite film of the year, is that this is a film with a lot to say. It's a film with some very heavy subject matter, and yet it is not afraid to have fun. This is a film that's completely unpretentious. It wants you to be there and enjoy yourself. It wants you to laugh, it wants you to smile. And the way that they kind of juggle the serious and the playful aspects of the film is nothing short of marvelous. And ultimately, it's gonna be one of those films that I cherish for a very long time, just because of how unique it is in its tone and in its story and in its characters, and the direction, of course. Anyway, that's it for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. Do feel free to comment your top 10 of the year below. That's it from me today. Please stay tuned for the next videos. Thank you very much for watching, guys. Thank you.